Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the story so far. My name is Wyatt, and today we're going to be starting a new series of long form videos where we go into detail about our homebrew version of EBERRON Unlimited. But first, we'd like to remind you that the channel does have a Patreon. And if you've ever wondered about supporting us financially, you can do so there at patreon.com/TS2F. That's patreon.com/TS2F. We appreciate any and all levels of support and have listed some very nice perks across 5 tiers that you can support us from, ranging from $1 a month to $10 a month. As always, you can support the channel by just liking the video and sharing it with someone who loves fantasy role-playing games. And you can subscribe, ring the bell to receive notifications when we post new videos. You can follow us on Instagram at instagram.com/thestorysofar_DND. And we're really just grateful for all levels of support. We're really excited to hear from our community about what they would like to see, about what they would like to hear about, and make sure to comment in the section below. So this series is going to be a lot more casual, a lot more light and breezy. For starters, I think one thing that I'd like to answer up front at the very beginning of the series is why EBERRON, right? I think a little context will help set the scene. I've always been interested in genre blending and genre bending, and the Victorian and Edwardian periods aesthetically have always kind of appealed to me, as much as medieval fantasy has, at least. For those who don't know, I'm actually a published author of an ongoing series of Gothic fantasy novels titled Gaslamps, Gunsmoke, and Gothica, published through Coalescence Publishing. It's a sort of hybrid publisher. Not a vanity publisher, but a hybrid small press studio. And I decided to start writing the first book, The Honeysuckle Horror, in 2020 after I got furloughed and then laid off from my job at really the kind of beginning of the COVID pandemic. I really love to pour my appreciation for horror, dark fantasy, and historical fiction into those books. So while I was writing the first one, I was just all juiced up on Victorian technology and mysticism. As I was writing that book, I was engaging with a lot of historical Gothic, steampunk, and gaslamp fantasy fiction. Most significantly, Netflix's League of Legends Arcane came out at the same time, and we'll get back to that later. But meanwhile, as all of this was going on, I also decided to get into D&D 5e. Now, I'd been playing tabletop role-playing games since my freshman year of college in 2017, but I'd mostly been playing with one group who entirely used a homebrew system that roughly drew from D&D 3.5. So when I decided to learn 5e, it was like starting college all over again. I knew, in addition to that, I really knew nothing about the Forgotten Realms, despite having grown up with the video games and set in the setting and R.A. Salvatore's books. So I was kind of going all in, diving all the way into Forgotten Realms lore, D&D 5e's rules, and everything like that, just because I really wanted to be a DM, and my old group systems, well, just didn't really lend themselves well to new DMs. D&D Beyond really helped, because one of the reasons why I had been hesitant to switch to 5e was because I'd always been told that the rule set was so dense in math and calculations and all of that stuff. 2 things I personally just really hate dealing with. But the app really helped streamline those things so I could focus on the fun parts. And this isn't sponsored in any way, by the way. I just think that it's important context to everything that was happening for me at the time. So I remember the night that I became just casually obsessed with EBERRON, and it was while I was binge watching the first 3 episodes of Arcane late one night, juiced up on Victorian fiction, brand new, learning how to play D&D for the first time ever. just loving it, loving just that whole period of my life, like really, I mean, if I think about it, it was probably the best possible way that the pandemic could have turned out for me. And I'm privileged to have been able to have that experience as opposed to something so much worse. But I was watching Arcane late that night, and I just thought, man, like I would just love to play D&D in a world like that, right? And I had heard about Eberron before, but it wasn't really on my radar until that night. And I just sort of remembered it, and I decided to go on D&D Beyond. I bought Wayfinder's Guide. um, it would really be 4 years before I ever ran a game in Eberron. I ran a few games in the Forgotten Realms that were really fun and really helped me grow as a DM, but I didn't really hit my stride until about 2021, when I finally found the party that pretty much comprises the rest of the Story So Far's team, and started my first Eberron campaign with them. We've been playing these campaigns for 4 years now, and with that being said, I'd like to give Eberron Unlimited a proper introduction. Eberron Unlimited is TS2F's original homebrew version of the world of Eberron. The name is meant to evoke images of early 2000s superhero cartoons like Spider-Man Unlimited or Justice League Unlimited. I really felt like these early 2000s cartoons walked the line between long-form character drama and serialized episodic screenwriting, and I hoped that our adventures in Eberron could emulate that balance. The world is kind of constructed on a hierarchy of resources, ranging from most official canon to most homebrew canon. The first place I go as the DM for Eberron information is Wizards of the Coast published material, particularly the 5e source books, Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron and Eberron Rising from the Last War. The reason I always use these, like I always fall back on these two books, isn't because I personally consider Wizards to be the best source of lore for Eberron, but because these two books specifically work together as a good basis for getting into the setting. They're broad strokes, laying out the aesthetic and intent of the world without it going into any real detail, or any really the lack of detail that gives the setting a true sense of identity apart from other settings like Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk. In all honesty, and this is just my opinion, but I don't think that Wizards of the Coast is the best source of Eberron information. At least not past 3.5. It really seems to me that they haven't really known how to handle Eberron since 3.5. They kind of just went all in on the Forgotten Realms at the beginning of 5e's lifespan, and for the majority of 5e, really, they've gone all in on the Forgotten Realms, and they knew they had something special with Eberron, or else they wouldn't have published it. Like I said in the video talking about the origins of Eberron as a setting, the link should be popping up on the screen now. They really didn't know. They knew that they had something really special in Eberron, but they didn't know how to incorporate it. So they've just kind of really treated it like they've treated most other settings, just as an extension of the Forgotten Realms, or a kind of riff on the Forgotten Realms. For Eberron's part, it's kind of just being treated like the Forgotten Realms, but with trance. Regardless of all that, though, these two books are fine and are probably going to be where most D&D hobbyists will start if they get curious about like Warforged and Kalishtar. So what do these books have to offer? I mean, at first glance, it would be easy to say that Rising is really just kind of a copy and paste job of Wayfinder's Guide, but just with more magic items, more monsters, and more guidance for DMs overall. I mean, one of the best things, and the thing that was done first in Rising, was group patrons, which eventually got put into Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So it's obviously a feature that D&D was testing out in Rising from the Last War, and thought, worked out really nicely. And it's no surprise that it did work out really nicely, because that's a great feature to have. Group patrons are really cool and interesting things to incorporate into your games. However, there is one important difference that keeps Wayfinder's Guide relevant, and that's that it has a lot more information specifically about Sharn than Rising does. Rising from the Last War really introduces you to the world of Eberron more broadly and the bigger pictures, certain aspects of the bigger pictures of the world. Whereas Wayfinder's Guide kind of is quick, sloppy, kind of in your face. These are the races of it. These are the new races from Eberron. This is the world of Eberron. This is the vibes of Eberron. And to complement all of that, they really leaned into Sharn. And there's a lot of information about Sharn as kind of a microcosm of what you can expect to experience in any sort of Eberron campaign. And that makes sense because Sharn is the perfect sort of place to experience fantasy noir storytelling, which is a big aspect of Eberron, of course. So the next place we go for Eberron information is the novels, comics, and other officially published narrative media for the setting, right? Anything really anything like that. Published narrative media for the setting. Most of these works were written by, or at least involved the direct input of Keith Baker in some way. This and their status as official publications makes them representative of the kinds of narratives that were expected by the creators of Eberron to play out. And so they're an important place to look for examples when writing Eberron adventures. Examples of this include the Dreaming Dark trilogy, which starts with the City of Towers, goes into the Shattered Land, and then ends with the Son of Khyber. I think the third one is called the Son of Khyber. Really great. I've been working my way through those personally myself. And even having been someone who has been studying Eberron's lore for a very long time, reading those books has shown me, like, wow, there's so much that I don't understand. There's so much that I haven't been incorporating or haven't had the knowledge to incorporate because I haven't read these books and experienced the narratives written for Eberron. So they're really great resources, and they're the kind of what I would consider the second most canon resources that we can draw from. The third place to find Eberron lore is the Eberron Fandom Wiki. This one can be very hit or miss. A lot of the articles that you can find tend to have sort of an aspect of copy and paste from the Forgotten Realms Fandom Wiki. So, of course, we run into that problem of Eberron kind of being treated as an extension or a kind of riff on the Forgotten Realms rather than a setting in its own right. So that's an issue. But that being said, the Eberron Fandom Wiki is an extremely important resource, free resource, for accessing information from previous editions of D&D 3.5 and 4e specifically. I am not made of money, and I'm sure a lot of people aren't either. So the D&D Fandom Wiki is a great resource because they use 3.5 and 4e sources as sources for their wiki articles. And so that makes it kind of a free, accessible resource to get into the kind of minutia that helps flesh out the setting, the kind of minutia that was present in 3.5 and 4e books when they were kind of just publishing books really all the time. A new D&D book was coming out, every other day, it seemed like anyways. And so a lot of minutia, right? Like a lot of really interesting, highly focused lore dumps were happening in 3.5 and 4e books, and those then by extension get put on the Eberron Fandom Wiki. So that's why the Eberron Fandom Wiki is ranked pretty high. And the fourth resource, or resources rather, as the case may be, might actually surprise you for how low they are, and definitely surprise you for being underneath the Eberron Fandom Wiki. And that is Keith Baker's blog, I think it's called Dragon Marks, and third-party sources like stuff from the DM's Guild and Adventurers League, etc. Don't get it twisted. Keith Baker's blog is an invaluable resource, and one that I personally put a lot of weight on in my research. He has a wealth of thoughts on so many different aspects of the setting, from big to small, but by his own repeated saying, they are just thoughts. He has always been very clear that he intends Eberron to be a setting that is almost completely malleable to the DM, beyond the broad strokes, the kind of scaffolding provided in 5th edition rulebooks. So the words of his blog are meant to guide DMs when planning Eberron adventures. It's not to tell them what is canonically true or false. That's why I put his blog on the same level as third-party or homebrew material. It's all resources to help flesh out a campaign, but none of it is canon like the things that are in officially published material, like Wizards of the Coast material, D&D material, or novels. So finally, of course, my last resource is my own DM notebook. Everything from my personal world building to the actions and material created by my players, that's what I'm talking about here. There is, and I really cannot stress this enough, so much about Eberron Unlimited that is totally original to us. It all follows the canon, identity, and guidance established by the other sources that I've mentioned. But our Eberron is our Eberron. We've done exactly what Keith Baker told us to do with the setting. And I can guarantee that you've never seen Eberron quite like this. I'm actually really excited to talk about this with you guys because I can be a lot more direct about my homebrewing and theory crafting. Eberron lore is hard to talk about because it is written in a way that is intentionally vague. So when I make lore videos like the ones I've been posting over the last couple of weeks, I find that I kind of have to be vague as well. If I'm not, then I run the risk of misrepresenting the setting for people who don't know enough to understand when I'm theory crafting and when I'm not. This series and its format allows me to just spit it out, right? To just spill all my thoughts and all my theories out onto the table. And the beauty of all of this is that this is our Eberron. Eberron Unlimited is the story so far as Eberron. It might be different than your take on the world, or maybe you agree with us on most things, but you would have done just a few things differently. In the end, though, it just doesn't matter because your Eberron can and should be different. Essentially, I'm just encouraging everyone to be on the same page. What matters when you're here with us is that you're being entertained by the story that's being told. There's no pressure on you to make your Eberron look like ours, and we don't feel any pressure to make our Eberron look like yours. Hopefully, this little rant has set the tone for our future videos in this series, but even if it didn't, it is officially over, and we are moving on. Today's topic in Eberron Unlimited World Building is the creation and the cosmos. Let me tell you the story of how this Eberron came to be. According to Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, everything began when Tiamat, Bahamut, and Sardior created the first world. Now, before we go on, I'd like to make a note on Tiamat, Bahamut, and Sardior. The three dragon gods, one evil, one good, and one neutral, if you're using the alignment system from D&D, are named as the creators of the first world. But in my opinion, alignment is gauche, and I think there's an even better way of conceptualizing them as three different but equally powerful primordial forces of creation in conflict with each other. Tiamat is a force of entropy, of suffering, hate, and heartache, all that makes life unbearable. Bahamut is a force of peace, bliss, and stability, everything that makes life a miracle. And Sardior represents liminality and transition, the necessary forces of change. When they interacted with each other, it was violent and chaotic, but it created the first world and all the life therein. The first world persisted until the arrival, or perhaps could be better understood as the emanation of the gods. When the gods came, they destroyed the first world, the shattered pieces of it splintering across time and space, creating a multiverse of what Fizban calls seedling realities. These are what we know from Spelljammer lore to be the crystal spheres, each tied together by the infinitely vast phlogiston sea. Every reality repeats the same cycle. The three forces create the world. The gods and their servants come and shatter it. Fizban's treasury tells us that dragons can sense themselves in other universes as a sort of seventh sense, their minds like kaleidoscopes, able to understand their reality while knowing the experiences of themselves in other realities. In my opinion, this is why the cycle continues as crystal spheres come and go out of existence. This multiversal collective memory is like a virus, causing the worlds across the multiverse to repeat the same sequence of events, no matter how different the specific circumstances might be. Draconic memory is the elegy of the first world, spoken of in Fizban's treasury, and by my reckoning, also the draconic prophecy itself. Fizban's also informs us that EBERRON isn't a seedling universe like Toril or Krynn is. It is actually an attempt at creating the first world, recreating the first world, rather. An attempt that I think was meant to escape the cycle of the elegy. 3 immensely powerful dragons shifted through what is implied to be Toril's ethereal plane. These 3 dragons drifted in the ethereal plane for so long that they lost all conscious memory. Their beings pulled apart from the effects of prolonged exposure to the deep ethereal, until they had been broken down into their basest form. 3 opposing forces: Kyber, EBERRON, and Sybaris. I believe that they did this in order to wipe their memories of the gods, to sever their multiversal link to the first world, and in so doing, possibly create a new world capable of enduring without the destruction brought on by the emanation of the gods. The 3 progenitor dragons had grown in power even as they lost their memories. Once their beings had dissolved into primordial essence, they were strong enough to draw the dream stuff of the ethereal plane into the spherical pull of their triune existence. In a process similar to casting spells that create pocket dimensions, like Mordenkainen's Magnificent Mansion, for example, the progenitors used the dream stuff to create a pocket universe, the only remnant of their memory of the elegy of the first world being unconsciously grafted onto the edges of the astral sphere, the draconic prophecy, written in the stars of EBERRON. As an aside on the draconic prophecy, I personally like to think of it as similar in concept to the Elder Scrolls from the game franchise by the same name. Impossibly ancient knowledge encapsulated in a readable form, capable of allowing those who read it to predict and possibly even change every possible outcome of every possible future if understood properly. This is how the dragons were able to use the draconic prophecy against the children of Kyber in the Draco Demon War, but also how the demons were able to use it back against them. Now, at last, we come to the creation of the universe and the planes within. Kyber, Sybaris, and EBERRON drew the dream stuff of the ethereal into their collective will and formed the boundaries of the cosmos. First, they formed the metaphysical planes. They created an astral plane to contain the pocket cosmos. And then they created Donvi, the perfect order, and Kithri, the churning chaos. Shavarath, the plane of war unending. Dalcor, the plane of dreams. Thalanis, the fey plane of life and memory. And Dolur, the shadow plane of death and loss. Next, they made the positive and negative energy planes, Irian, the eternal day, and Mabar, the endless night. After these, they made the elemental planes, Risia, the plane of ice and elemental water, Lamania, the twilight forest, plane of elemental earth, Fernia, the sea of fire, which the plane should go without saying, and Sirania, the azure sky and plane of elemental air. With the planes ordered, the physical and metaphysical building blocks of a new universe were ready for use in the progenitor's creation. Until that point, the great dragons were in unison. But when Kyber saw the tools of infinite possibility at her disposal, she became envious, and the story goes that she decided to take control over creation instead of continuing to share it with her partners. As we're told in Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron, when the hour of her betrayal had come, Kyber killed Sybaris, rending his crystalline body into 1,000 pieces of 1,000 pieces, before turning her wrath on Eberron. Knowing she couldn't defeat her sister in single combat, Eberron wrapped her body around Kyber and drew on the power of all of the planes to seal her sister within the prison she made of her own body. Thus, the prime material plane was formed and called Eberron. Sybaris' body formed the ring that surrounds it, and the planes were set on their orbits around the world. Creation was complete, and soon life would arise to claim it. I think that's where we're going to end things today. I would just want to thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of EBERRON Unlimited. Let me know if you like this kind of video in the comments below, and don't forget to like it, share it with someone who loves fantasy role-playing games, and subscribe, ringing the bell to stay notified when the next EBERRON Unlimited world building video comes out. Go ahead and check out the Patreon for some really awesome perks, and we'll see you in the next one.